is Duncan, the alpha of the Blood Moon Pack, and this is the story of Luna Mia. She was his unwanted and unmarked Luna, until his sister framed her for murder. Chapter 1. A Ceremony of Ashes. The scent of night-blooming jasmine and smoldering sacred wood filled the clearing, a fragrant veil over the most sacred night of the year. The mating ceremony. Under the colossal, watchful eye of the full moon, the pack of the Midnight Fang gathered, a sea of eager, upturned faces. Whispers of anticipation rustled like dry leaves, all eyes fixed on the solitary, powerful figure standing before the stone of proclamation. Alpha Baxter stood as if carved from the very granite of the stone itself. His broad shoulders were thrown back, his jaw dusted with dark stubble, set in a line of unwavering authority. He was the pinnacle of shifter perfection. Power, strength, and a ruthless grace that commanded both fear and devotion. His dark eyes, the color of a winter storm, scanned the crowd, not with hope, but with a cool, detached expectation. He was here to receive his due, to be granted the one thing that would complete his reign, a Luna worthy of his legacy. The air crackled with potential. One by one, unmated she-wolves of eligible status stepped forward, their hearts a frantic drumbeat against their ribs as they passed before their alpha. The moon goddess's magic would stir, a celestial pull that would bind two souls for life. Baxter watched them pass, the fierce warriors, the elegant diplomats, the daughters of powerful allies. He expected a flare of heat, a thunderous pull in his chest, the undeniable call of fate. He felt nothing but impatience. And then she stumbled forward. It was Mia. Of course it was Mia. Clumsy, timid Mia, who seemed to have been born with 2 left feet and a perpetual blush on her cheeks. She was the pack's quiet joke, the daughter of a low-ranking gamma, a mouse in a world of wolves. She tripped on a root that wasn't there, barely catching herself, and a soft, sympathetic titter rippled through the crowd. Baxter's lip curled in a faint, unconscious sneer. Get on with it, he thought, his gaze already sliding past her to the next, more promising female. But then it happened. A force like a physical blow slammed into his chest, stealing his breath. The world narrowed, the sounds of the pack fading into a dull roar in his ears. A scent, subtle and sweet like wild strawberries and fresh rain, cut through the jasmine and smoke, ensnaring him. It was her scent, and it was everything. A searing heat, foreign and unwelcome, coiled low in his gut. The mate pull, the divine recognition. It was a primal, undeniable command from the goddess herself. No, the word was a silent roar in his mind. This couldn't be. This was a mistake. A disgrace. His eyes, wide with a horror he couldn't conceal, snapped to hers. Mia was staring at him, her hand pressed to her own heart, her large, doe-like eyes filled with a stunned, trembling wonder. The mate bond, a fragile golden thread, had snapped into place between them. For her it was a miracle. For him it was a life sentence. A muscle in his jaw ticked. The ceremony fell into a stunned, pregnant silence. The former alpha, Boren, a man whose wisdom was etched into the lines of his face, stepped forward. His eyes, the same stormy gray as his son's, held a deep, knowing calm. The moon goddess has spoken. Boren's voice boomed, resonant with finality. She has blessed our pack. Alpha Baxter, your Luna Mia. The words hung in the air, a verdict. There was a smattering of applause, confused and hesitant, quickly swallowed by the overwhelming silence. Baxter didn't move. He didn't reach for her. He simply stood there, his expression hardening from shock into a mask of cold, bitter acceptance. He could not reject her. To reject a fated mate was to spit in the face of the goddess, to curse his own soul, and invite weakness into his pack. His father would never allow it. He offered her his arm, the movement stiff, robotic. His fingers did not curl around hers. They merely tolerated her touch. As they turned to face the pack, he felt the weight of 1,000 stares. Pity, confusion, and from a select few, cruel amusement. His sister, Ilara, stood at the front of the crowd, a beautiful, venomous creature with ice-blonde hair and eyes like chips of blue frost. A slow, malicious smile was spreading across her perfectly painted lips. She looked from her brother's stony face to Mia's overwhelmed, hopeful one, and her smile widened. This was not the powerful alliance she had hoped for her brother. This was entertainment. The celebration that followed was a farce. In the great hall of the Alpha's mansion, Baxter stood apart, a glass of amber whiskey in his hand, his back to the room. He could feel Mia's presence like a persistent, buzzing fly. She was trying to fulfill her role, trying to greet pack members, but she was a ghost at the feast. People nodded politely and turned away, their conversations dying as she passed. "Brother." Alara's voice was a silken purr as she came to stand beside him. "The moon goddess has a peculiar sense of humor, doesn't she?" Baxter grunted, draining his glass. "It is not a matter for jest, Alara." "Isn't it?" she murmured, her gaze following Mia, who had just stumbled, nearly upending a tray of champagne flutes from a passing waiter. "Look at her. She can't even walk in a straight line. How is she to lead the she-wolves? How is she to stand by your side?" She leaned closer, her voice dropping. "She is a flaw in our bloodline, a weakness." Baxter's knuckles turned white around his empty glass. He knew she was right. Every instinct in him, every fiber of his alpha being, rebelled against this bond. The mate pull was a physical ache, a siren's call to claim her, to mark her, to make her his. But his pride, his ambition, his very identity, screamed in refusal. Later that night, in the chilling silence of the Alpha's wing, he led her to a bedroom. Not his. A guest room, down the hall from his own. "This will be your room," he said, his voice devoid of all emotion. He didn't look at her. Mia stood in the doorway, her small frame seeming to drown in the elaborate borrowed white dress. "Baxter, Her voice was a whisper, soft and laced with the vulnerability of their new bond. He finally turned, his stormy eyes raking over her with such cold condescension that she flinched. "You will address me as Alpha." He cut her off, his words like shards of ice. "The moon goddess may have forced this arrangement, but do not mistake her whims for my affection. You are my Luna in name only. Do not expect anything from me. Do you understand?" The light in her eyes, the fragile hope that had sparked during the ceremony, guttered and died. She simply nodded, her throat working as she fought back tears. He turned and walked away, the sound of his retreating footsteps echoing like a death knell in the lavish hallway. He didn't look back. He didn't see her sink to the floor, her body racketed with silent sobs, the first ashes of her dreams scattering in the cold, empty room. The disgrace had begun. Chapter 2. The Weight of a Crown of Thorns. The grand mansion of the Midnight Fang Pack, a structure of cold stone and imposing elegance, became Mia's gilded cage. The title of Luna was a crown of thorns, digging deeper with each passing day, drawing not blood, but her spirit, drop by precious drop. Her days began before the sun had even kissed the horizon, not with the gentle awakening of a cherished mate, but with the sharp, imperious voice of Alara. "Mia, you lazy girl, are you still sleeping? The East Wing bathrooms won't clean themselves." And so, the Luna would rise, her slender fingers that should have been learning the delicate art of pack diplomacy and strategy, instead scrubbing porcelain and tile until they were raw. The pungent smell of bleach became her new perfume, a stark contrast to the wild strawberry scent the mate bond had once revealed to Baxter. The Omegas who were supposed to serve her would watch with pitying eyes, quickly looking away when she glanced up, too fearful of Alara's wrath to offer help. Alara was an artist of torment, her cruelty meticulously crafted. She dismissed the kitchen staff for the afternoon, declaring she had a craving for a specific, complex pastry that only the Luna's delicate touch could achieve. "Don't look so pathetic," Alara sneered, watching Mia struggle with flour and butter in the massive, intimidating kitchen. "A real Luna should be able to provide for her pack, shouldn't she? Or are you as useless in the kitchen as you are in my brother's bed?" The mention of Baxter was a special kind of agony. The mate bond was a live wire under Mia's skin, a constant humming awareness of him. It pulled her gaze to him whenever he entered a room, made her heart stutter at the sound of his voice. Sometimes, in the pack hall during meals, she would catch herself staring at the strong line of his profile, at the way his hand curled around his steak knife, and a wave of such intense, unwanted longing would wash over her that she felt dizzy. Once he caught her. His stormy eyes lifted from his plate and locked with hers across the crowded hall. For a single heart-stopping second, she saw something flicker in their depths, a spark of that primal pull. Her breath hitched. Then it was gone, replaced by a glacial chill. He looked her up and down, taking in the simple, servile dress she wore, the faint smear of flour on her cheek. "Do you find something amusing, Luna?" he asked, his voice cutting through the ambient noise, causing conversations to halt. The title was a weapon on his tongue. "Or perhaps you're confused about your place. It is there." He gestured vaguely around the room. "Serving my sister. Not here, staring at your alpha like a love-struck pup." A hot flush of humiliation burned its way up her neck to her cheeks. The pack members nearby ducked their heads, but she could feel their silent judgment, their shared amusement. She was a spectacle, the clumsy Luna who scrubbed toilets and pined for a mate who despised her. She fled the hall, the sound of Alara's delighted laughter ringing in her ears. The only solace, the only person who offered a semblance of kindness was the former alpha, Boren. He would often find her in the library, attempting to educate herself on pack law, or sitting alone in the gardens, trying to find a moment's peace. He sat beside her on a stone bench one afternoon, the scent of old books and pipe tobacco clinging to him. "The bond is a heavy burden when it is not shared, child," he said softly, his wise eyes seeing straight through her fragile composure. Tears welled in Mia's eyes, but she stubbornly blinked them back. "He hates me." "Baxter does not hate you," Boren corrected gently. "He hates the situation. He hates that his destiny was not what he envisioned. His pride is a fortress and he is its most stubborn prisoner." He placed a gnarled hand over hers. "The moon goddess does not make mistakes, Mia. You have a strength he cannot yet see. Do not let them extinguish your light." His words were a balm, but they couldn't protect her from the escalating reality of her life. The tasks became more demeaning. Alara began tossing her delicate, lace-trimmed inner wares into a basket at Mia's feet. "My Luna," Alara would say with a saccharine smile, "since you have so much free time, be a darling and ensure these are hand-washed. The machines are so rough on the silk. I'm sure you understand." Washing the intimate garments of the woman who tormented her daily was a new low. Mia's hands would tremble as she submerged the fine silk in cold water, the act feeling like the ultimate violation, a symbolic erasure of her own dignity. She tried to speak to Baxter about it once, mustering every ounce of courage she possessed. She waited outside his study until he emerged, his presence filling the hallway. "Alpha," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Alara, she has me washing her private things. It's not fitting for a Luna." Baxter stopped, looking down at her as if she were a peculiar insect that had dared to crawl across his path. "Fitting?" he echoed, a cold smirk playing on his lips. "And what, in your esteemed opinion, is fitting for a Luna? Tripping over your own feet? Hiding in corners? My sister is merely trying to find a useful purpose for you. Be grateful she is taking the time." The door to his study clicked shut, leaving her alone in the vast, cold hallway, his words echoing around her. Be grateful. The thorns of her crown dug deeper, piercing the last of her hope. The final confrontation happened the night everything shattered. Mia, carrying a tray of Alara's dinner to her room, heard raised voices from the former Alpha's study. It was Boren and Baxter. "You must mark her, son." Boren's voice was uncharacteristically sharp. "You must make her your true Luna. This disrespect cannot stand. The pack is whispering. The goddess's blessing is turning into a curse under your roof." "I will not." Baxter's roar was furious. shaking the very portraits on the walls. I will not bind myself for life to that nobody. She is a shadow, a stain on my authority. Let Alara have her fun. It is the only use she has. The tray in Mia's hands rattled, a spoon clattering to the floor. The words were a physical blow, each one a lash against her soul. A nobody. A stain. Let Alara have her fun. Tears she could no longer control streamed down her face. She abandoned the tray and ran, not to her room, but up the grand staircase towards the west wing, seeking the one person who had shown her kindness. She needed to see Boren. She needed to hear him say again that the goddess didn't make mistakes, because in that moment, it felt like the greatest mistake of all. She reached the top of the stairs, her vision blurred by tears. She saw Boren's study door was ajar. She took a step towards it, a sob catching in her throat. And then, the world exploded into a nightmare. A blood-curdling scream tore through the mansion, Ilara's scream. It was followed by a sickening, heavy thud from the bottom of the foyer stairs. Mia froze at the top of the landing, her blood turning to ice. She looked down. There, splayed on the cold marble floor, limbs twisted at unnatural angles, was Boren. His sightless eyes stared up at the vaulted ceiling. Before Mia could even process the horror, a figure rushed past her. Ilara, her face a perfect mask of grief and terror, pointed a trembling, accusatory finger straight at Mia. "She pushed him," Ilara shrieked, her voice raw and piercing. "I heard her arguing with him. I came to find out what was happening and I saw her. I saw Mia push him." Mia stood, paralyzed, shock and confusion rooting her to the spot. The world tilted. The kind eyes, the gentle voice, the only hand that had offered comfort, gone, and she was being accused of snuffing it out. Heavy, frantic footsteps pounded up the stairs. Baxter appeared, his face pale, his stormy eyes wide with a dawning, terrible realization. He looked from his father's broken body to his sister's hysterical face, and then finally, his gaze landed on Mia. The look in his eyes was not one of questions or doubt. It was one of pure, unadulterated conviction. The conviction of a man who had been waiting for a reason, any reason, to be rid of the stain on his life. In that single devastating moment, as his gaze, filled with more hatred than she had ever thought possible, bored into her, Mia felt it. The fragile, golden thread of the mate bond, the one thing that had tethered her to this hell, didn't just fray. It snapped. Chapter 3. The Alpha's judgment time for Mia congealed into a thick, horrifying syrup. The world became a series of fractured, surreal images, the panicked shouts of pack members gathering in the foyer, the cold, unyielding grip of a beta's hand on her arm, dragging her away from the top of the stairs, the sight of Boren's body, so small and broken on the vast expanse of marble, being covered with a dark sheet. Through it all, she could only hear one sound, looping in her mind like a broken record, Ilara's scream. She pushed him. She was taken not to her room, but to the cells beneath the mansion, a place reserved for traitors and rogues. The air was damp, smelling of earth and rust. The door, a solid slab of reinforced steel, clanged shut behind her, the finality of the sound echoing in the small dark space. She sank onto the cold stone bench, her body trembling uncontrollably. This wasn't happening. It was a nightmare. She would wake up in her bed, the scent of bleach still in her nose, and the true horror would be that she had to go back to scrubbing Ilara's floors. But the chill of the stone seeped through her thin dress, a brutal anchor to reality. Upstairs in his study, Alpha Baxter was a storm contained. He stood by the fireplace, his back to the room, his fists clenched so tightly his knuckles were bone white. The portrait of his father, painted in his prime, hung above the mantel, a silent, judging witness. The initial blinding rage was subsiding, leaving behind a cold, hollow ache. His father was gone. The one steady presence in his life, the man whose counsel he had always secretly relied upon, was snuffed out, and the instrument of his death was the one creature the moon goddess had cursed him with. Brother. Alara's voice was soft, ragged from crying. She entered the room, her face pale, her eyes red-rimmed. She looked the very picture of devastated innocence. "I can't believe it," she whispered, wrapping her arms around herself. "I heard them arguing. Father was telling her she had to be stronger, that she was shaming the Alpha's name with her weakness. She was so angry. I've never heard her speak like that. Then I saw her hands on his back. She shoved him, Baxter. She shoved him right down the stairs. Every word from his sister's lips was a nail in Mia's coffin. It fit. It fit the narrative he had already constructed in his mind. The clumsy, resentful nobody, pushed too far by his father's well-meaning advice, lashing out in a fit of pathetic rage. The mate bond in his chest, which had once been a searing brand, was now a dead, cold thing. He felt nothing for her. Nothing but a consuming, righteous fury. "The pack law is clear, Alpha." Baxter turned. His head beta, Kieran, a man of unwavering loyalty and stern principle, stood by the door. "The punishment for the murder of a member of the Alpha's family is 100 strokes of the whip and public hanging at the border." The words hung in the air, clinical and absolute. Hanging. The image flashed in Baxter's mind. Mia's small body, limp and broken, swinging from a gibbet for the crows to pick at. A strange, sharp twinge, something that felt disturbingly like protest, flickered in the emptiness where the mate bond had been. He crushed it instantly. "See that it is done," Baxter said, his voice a low, gravelly rasp. He turned back to the fire, dismissing them. At dawn, down in the cell, Mia heard the heavy tread of footsteps approaching. It wasn't the gentle, measured step of Boren. It was the hard, purposeful stride of judgment. The door creaked open, and Kieran stood there, his face an unreadable mask of duty. "Come," he said. "I didn't do it," Mia whispered, the words tearing from a raw throat. It was the first thing she had said since the accusation. "Kieran, I swear on the moon goddess, I didn't." Kieran's jaw tightened. For a fleeting moment, something like uncertainty crossed his features. He had seen the way Alara tormented her. He had witnessed Baxter's contempt, but the Alpha's sister had borne witness. The law was the law. "The Alpha has passed judgment," was all he said, his tone leaving no room for appeal. He led her not outside, but to the center of the pack's training grounds. A thick, ancient post was driven deep into the earth there, its wood stained dark with weather and, it was whispered, the blood of past punishments. A crowd had already gathered, their faces a blur of shock, morbid curiosity and grim satisfaction. They had never accepted her. Now, they would see her punished for the ultimate transgression. And then she saw him. Alpha Baxter stood on a raised platform, a king presiding over an execution. His arms were crossed over his chest, his expression carved from granite. His eyes, when they met hers, held no storm, no fire, no emotion at all. They were flat, dead. He looked at her as if she were a stranger, a piece of refuse to be disposed of. That deadness in his gaze was a pain far worse than any whip. It was the final confirmation that the bond was truly broken, that the male who was supposed to be her other half felt absolutely nothing as he condemned her to death. Alara stood slightly behind him, one hand resting on his arm in a show of solidarity. A single perfect tear traced a path down her cheek, but her eyes, when they briefly met Mia's, held a glint of pure, unadulterated triumph. Mia was led to the post. Her hands were untied, only to be secured tightly around the rough, splintered wood. The coarse texture bit into her skin. She closed her eyes, trying to find a quiet place in her mind, a memory of her mother's face, the scent of the forest before she came to this mansion, anything to separate herself from this reality. She didn't find it. The first crack of the whip was a sound she would carry to her grave. It was like lightning splitting her world in two. A line of pure, white-hot fire erupted across her back. The air rushed from her lungs in a silent scream. Her knees buckled, but the bonds on her wrists held her upright. The second lash came, overlapping the first. Agony, bright and blinding. She could smell the coppery tang of her own blood. The third, the fourth. She lost count. The world dissolved into a symphony of pain. Each crack was a fresh explosion, tearing through skin and muscle, branding her with her supposed crime. She could hear the pack watching, a low collective murmur. She could hear Alara's soft, feigned sobs, but through the haze of torment, through the tears that streamed down her face and mixed with the dirt beneath her, she kept her eyes open. She fixed her gaze on the one person who held the power to stop this, Alpha Baxter. He did not look away. He watched every stroke, his face impassive, a statue of cold justice. He watched as the delicate dress she wore was shredded, as the skin on her back was laid open. He watched as her body jerked and convulsed with each impact. He watched, and he felt nothing. This is the male the moon goddess chose for me. A distant, broken part of her mind whispered, "This is the heart I was meant to cherish." A strange sound bubbled up in her throat, a choked, guttural mix of a sob and a laugh. It was the sound of a soul breaking beyond repair. By the 50th stroke, she could no longer stand. Her weight was fully suspended by her raw, bleeding wrists. Consciousness flickered. The world went dark, then bright with pain, then dark again. The whipping seemed to last an eternity. When it finally stopped, the silence that fell was more deafening than the cracks had been. Her body was a single, raw nerve of agony. She couldn't feel her legs. She could barely breathe. Through a slit in her swollen eyes, she saw Kieran approach Baxter. "The 100 strokes are complete, Alpha," Kieran reported, his voice tight. Baxter gave a single curt nod. His eyes swept over her broken form lashed to the post. "Take her to the border. See the sentence carried out to its conclusion." He turned and walked away, Alara clinging to his arm. He didn't look back. As two betas began to untie her limp hands, Mia's head lolled. Her eyes, clouded with pain and despair, scanned the sea of faces one last time. They were all a blur of grim satisfaction. All except one. A pair of burning, red-rimmed eyes, filled with a grief and fury so profound it cut through her own suffering. It was the elderly pack historian, the one who had often spoken with Boren. But the gaze only lasted a second before he, too, looked away. They dragged her away from the post, her feet leaving twin trails of blood in the dirt. The journey to the pack border was a fog of jolting pain and encroaching darkness. She was only half aware of the betas arguing. "She's barely breathing, Kieran. Another few minutes and she'll be gone. Why bother with the noose? The law demands it. The law has been served 100 strokes. Look at her. She won't survive the night. Let the rogues or the elements have her. It's a cleaner death than hanging for the crows." There was a long pause. "Fine," Kieran finally said, his voice heavy with something that might have been pity. "Leave her. We will report to the Alpha that the sentence was carried out in full." They dumped her unceremoniously at the base of a gnarled, lightning-scarred oak that marked the edge of Midnight Fang territory. The impact with the cold, hard ground sent a fresh wave of agony through her, and a weak, broken whimper escaped her lips. She heard their footsteps recede, then the sound of a jeep engine starting and driving away. Silence descended, deep and absolute. The only sounds were the rustle of dead leaves and her own shallow, ragged breaths. The cold seeped into her bones, a welcome numbness compared to the fire on her back. Darkness crept in from the edges of her vision. "This is it," she thought, the words slow and thick. "This is how I die. Alone, unwanted, unmarked." But then, as the world faded to black, a new presence made itself known. It wasn't a sound. It was a feeling, a predatory, ancient awareness that prickled against her ruined skin. From the deep shadows of the trees just beyond the border, a pair of eyes ignited, not the gold or stormy gray of a wolf. These eyes burned with the color of fresh blood, of embers in a forgotten hearth. They were fixed on her broken body, watching with an intensity, and they were moving closer. Chapter 4. The Phoenix and the Ashes. The world was a distant, painful throb. Mia floated in a sea of agony, each breath a shard of glass in her lungs, the shredded skin of her back screaming a silent litany of betrayal. Then, a new sensation. A feeling of being lifted. A fresh wave of torment crashed over her, so profound that her mind, in a desperate act of self-preservation, simply let go. She embraced the comforting darkness, falling into it like a stone into a bottomless well. It was a temporary escape, a sweet, silent nothingness, where there was no pain, no Baxter, no Alara, no whip. There was only the void. When awareness began to prick at the edges of the void, it was not with the sharp return of pain but with a series of slow, foreign sensations. The softness of clean linen against her cheek, the gentle herbal scent of poultices, a deep, resonant voice, speaking in low, commanding tones somewhere nearby. She forced her eyes open. The light was dim, filtered through the hide walls of a large, rustic chamber. The architecture was different, rougher, more utilitarian than the cold elegance of the Midnight Fang mansion. A massive figure was silhouetted against the doorway, speaking to someone unseen. See that she has broth, and more of the wound-wort salve. Yes, Alpha Duncan. Alpha Duncan. The name meant nothing to her, a blank space in her mind. She tried to move, and a whimper escaped her lips as the fire on her back reignited. The figure at the door turned. He was immense. Taller and broader than even Baxter, with a presence that seemed to suck the air from the room. His hair was dark, shot through with strands of silver at the temples, and his face was a landscape of hard planes and sharp angles, weathered by time and command. But it was his eyes that held her. They were the color of a winter sky, pale and piercing, and they held no warmth, only a cool, detached assessment. "You're awake," he stated. His voice was like gravel, devoid of any comforting inflection. Mia could only stare, fear and confusion warring within her. "You are in the Blood Moon Pack territory," he continued, as if reading a report. "My pack. You were found at my border. My physician says you should be dead." He took a step closer, his gaze sweeping over her bandaged form. "Consider this. Charity work. Do not mistake it for anything more." And with that, he was gone, leaving Mia alone with the throbbing echo of his words. Charity work. It was a different kind of dismissal, but a dismissal nonetheless. Yet it lacked the personal, searing cruelty of Baxter's. This was indifference, and in her current state, indifference was a balm. Her recovery was slow, a brutal marathon of pain and healing. The pack's healer, a stern but kind-eyed woman, tended to her with efficient care. The members of the Blood Moon Pack, while not overtly friendly, were respectful. They called her Miss and gave her a wide berth, their eyes holding a curiosity tinged with something she couldn't quite place. Not pity, but a sort of grim recognition. Weeks turned into a month. As her body began to mend, she was given simple tasks, mending clothes, sorting herbs, to earn her keep. Alpha Duncan was a distant, looming figure. He would pass her in the hallways, his pale eyes glancing over her without a flicker of interest. He was a fortress, silent and impenetrable. The change started small, almost imperceptibly. One day, as she carried a basket of laundry through the common hall, he was there, going over maps with his betas. As she passed, he paused mid-sentence, his head tilted slightly. He didn't look at her, but she saw his nostrils flare, a faint, almost confused crease appearing between his brows. For a fleeting moment, the relentless tension in his shoulders seemed to ease. He shook his head slightly and returned to his maps. Another time, she was tasked with serving the Alpha his evening tea. Her hands, though healed, still trembled slightly from the memory of trauma. As she set the cup before him, her fingers brushed against his. It was like touching lightning. A jolt, sharp and undeniable, shot up her arm, straight to her core. She gasped, snatching her hand back. The cup rattled in its saucer. Alpha Duncan went perfectly still. His head, which had been bent over a report, slowly lifted. Those winter sky eyes locked onto hers, and for the first time, the cool detachment in them was gone, replaced by a look of stunned, primal shock. The air in the room thickened, charged with an energy she had felt only once before, on a night drenched in jasmine and despair. But this was different. This was not a gentle golden thread. This was a steel cable, snapping taut between them, unbreakable and absolute. He stood, the movement fluid and powerful, his chair scraping against the stone floor. He loomed over her, his gaze raking over her face, her form, as if seeing her for the very first time. "You," he breathed, the word a low rumble of disbelief and dawning, ferocious certainty. Mia could only stare back, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The mate pull was there, a roaring, undeniable force, but it was tangled with the ghost of the last one, a phantom limb of pain. "It's you," he said, his voice gaining strength, filling with a possessiveness that was both terrifying and, in its raw honesty, a strange kind of solace. "All this time, here." He didn't hesitate. He didn't question. He didn't scorn. In that single, earth-shattering moment, Alpha Duncan looked at the broken, scarred woman before him and saw only one thing: his mate. Later, when the initial shock had subsided and the bond had settled into a steady, powerful hum in their veins, he demanded her story. Sitting in his private chambers, with the fire casting long shadows, Mia told him everything: the ceremony, the scorn, the servitude, the whipping, the betrayal. She spoke in a quiet, monotone voice, the words scraping out of a soul that was still raw. As she spoke, she watched the storm gather in Duncan's eyes. The pale blue darkened to the color of a raging sea. His hands, resting on the arms of his chair, clenched, the wood groaning in protest. When she finished, a heavy silence filled the room, broken only by the crackle of the fire. He stood and walked to the window, looking out over his territory, his back a rigid line of contained fury. "He discarded you," Duncan said, his voice dangerously soft. "He whipped you. He left you for dead." He turned, and the look on his face was one of pure, undiluted vengeance. "He will pay for this, Mia. I will make him regret the day he was born. I will make him look upon what he threw away and know it is the greatest mistake of his pathetic life." The next phase of her life began not as a recovery, but as a forging. Alpha Duncan became her mentor, her general, her avenger. The charity work was over. Now, she was his mission. Her training was relentless. At dawn, it was combat, her slender body being taught to harness a strength she never knew she possessed. He was a brutal instructor, pushing her past her limits, forcing her to channel her pain and rage into every punch, every kick, every parry. "Again," he would bark as she lay panting in the dirt. "Your enemy will not show you mercy. Use your anger, Mia. Make it your weapon." In the afternoons, it was strategy and politics. He taught her how to read a pack's dynamics, how to find weaknesses, how to command a room, not with volume, but with presence. He forced her to speak, to argue, to defend her positions. "You are not a servant," he would growl, his gaze intense. "You are a Luna, my Luna. Start believing it." Months bled into a year. The clumsy, timid girl who had been dumped at the border was gone. In her place stood a woman with eyes that held a flinty sharpness, a body honed to a warrior's edge, and a mind as strategic as any beta's. The scars on her back remained, but they were no longer a mark of shame. They were a testament to her survival, a map of the life she had left behind. She had risen from the ashes, but she was no longer the gentle, hopeful Mia. She was something harder, something fiercer, a phoenix forged in vengeance. One evening, Duncan found her on the training grounds, practicing knife throws with a deadly accuracy that would have made his best warrior proud. "It is time," he said, his voice calm. Mia stilled, the knife poised in her hand. She knew what he meant. The Midnight Fang Pack is hosting a summit for the regional alphas, he continued. A discussion on border disputes. You will lead our delegation. A slow, cold smile touched Mia's lips. It was a smile that held no joy, only the sharp anticipation of a reckoning. It would be my honor, Alpha, she said, her voice steady and clear. Duncan's eyes gleamed with predatory satisfaction. This was what he wanted. This was the first move in his game. To send the woman Baxter had discarded back to him, not as a victim, but as an equal. A power. To watch the recognition dawn, the regret poison him. He wanted to break Alpha Baxter, and he was sending the perfect weapon. Chapter 5. The Summit of Ghosts. The journey to the Midnight Fang territory was a silent, grim procession. Mia rode at the head of the delegation, flanked by two of Duncan's most formidable betas, Silas and Rorik. They were mountains of muscle and silent loyalty. Their respect for her earned through sweat and blood on the training grounds, not granted by a celestial decree. She was no longer the clumsy girl they'd heard whispers about. She was their Alpha's chosen mate, the sharpened blade he was sending into the heart of the enemy. As the familiar, hated landscape came into view, a cold calm settled over Mia. The phantom pains in her back didn't flare with anxiety. Instead, they served as a cold reminder of her purpose. She was not returning to her past. She was invading it. At the border, the Midnight Fang guards stared, their jaws slack with confusion and dawning recognition. The woman sitting astride the powerful black mare was a stranger, yet her face was a ghost from their recent history. Her posture was regal, her gaze direct and unflinching. The delicate, wild strawberry scent they associated with the clumsy Luna was now layered with something else. The crisp, clean scent of snow and iron, the signature scent of the Blood Moon Pack. State your business, one of the guards stammered, his spear held uncertainly. Silas stepped forward, his voice a low rumble. The Blood Moon Pack delegation, led by Luna Mia, for the Alpha Summit. The title Luna hung in the air, a declaration of war in itself. The guards exchanged bewildered glances before waving them through. The approach to the mansion was a study in surrealism. Every tree, every stone was imprinted with a memory of her humiliation. But now, she saw it through new eyes, not as a prisoner, but as a strategist assessing a battlefield. She noted the positions of the sentries, the state of the defenses, the subtle signs of unease among the pack members who stopped to stare. When they reached the main courtyard, the scene was exactly as Duncan had predicted. Alphas and their entourages milled about, the air buzzing with pre-summit tension. And then, as she dismounted with a fluid, graceful motion, the buzz began to die, replaced by a spreading wave of silence. All eyes turned to her. She was a vision of lethal elegance. She wore trousers of supple black leather and a tunic of deep crimson, the color of old blood. Her hair, once always falling from a messy braid, was now intricately woven into a crown that highlighted the sharp lines of her face. The timidity was gone, burned away, leaving behind a cool, assessing confidence that was more intimidating than any snarl. And then, he appeared. Alpha Baxter emerged from the main doors, Ilara clinging to his arm as always, her smile brittle and fixed. He was preparing to greet the arriving Alphas, his expression one of bored authority. His gaze swept over the courtyard, and for a moment, it slid over her, dismissing the unfamiliar woman in blood moon colors. Then, it snapped back. The change in him was instantaneous and profound. His stormy eyes widened, the bored mask shattered into a mosaic of shock, disbelief, and a flicker of something raw and hungry. The mate bond, that dead, cold thing he had buried, gave a violent, agonizing twitch in his chest, as if being resurrected with a lightning strike. Mia. The name was a breathless, disbelieving whisper, but in the utter silence, it carried like a gunshot. Ilara's grip on his arm tightened, her knuckles white. Her beautiful face paled, the carefully constructed mask of innocence cracking to reveal pure, undiluted panic. Mia met his gaze, and she allowed a small, cold smile to touch her lips. It held no warmth, no recognition of their shared past, only the polite courtesy of one leader to another. "Alpha Baxter," she said, her voice clear and steady, carrying effortlessly across the courtyard. It was not the timid whisper he remembered. It was the voice of a Luna. "The Blood Moon Pack thanks you for your hospitality." The spell was broken. Whispers erupted, a cacophony of confusion and speculation. Is that really her? The one who was exiled? She's stunning. She's with the Blood Moon Pack. Baxter stood frozen, his mind reeling. The woman before him was a phoenix risen from the ashes of the one he had condemned. Every line of her body spoke of power and grace. The mate pull, once a source of disgust, was now a maddening, irresistible siren's call, amplified 1,000-fold by her transformation. He felt a possessive, primal urge so strong it stole his breath. She was his. The goddess had given her to him. He took a step forward, his composure crumbling. "Mia, you're alive." "As you see," she replied, her tone coolly diplomatic. She turned slightly, gesturing to her betas. "These are my escorts, Silas and Rorik. Now if you'll excuse us, the journey was long. We would like to be shown to our quarters." She was dismissing him, in his own courtyard, before his entire pack and all the gathered alphas. A red haze of possessive rage clouded Baxter's vision. He saw the way the other alphas were looking at her, with respect, with curiosity, with admiration. She was his mate, his Luna, and she was standing with another pack, treating him like a stranger. "You will stay," he commanded, his alpha power rolling out, an instinctive attempt to dominate her, to reclaim what he felt was his. The effect was not what he expected. Mia didn't flinch. She didn't lower her eyes. She simply raised an eyebrow, a gesture of such cool disdain it was more powerful than any retort. Behind her, Silas and Rorik took a simultaneous step forward, their low growls a palpable threat in the air. "I am here as a representative of Alpha Duncan of the Blood Moon Pack," she said, her voice dropping, becoming dangerously soft. "I am not one of your pack members to be commanded, Alpha Baxter. My allegiance lies elsewhere." The word allegiance was a knife to his gut. He saw it then, the finality in her eyes. There was no forgiveness there, no lingering hope. There was only the cold, hard reality of the choice he had made. Ilara, sensing her brother's unraveling control, found her voice. "This is an outrage," she shrilled, pointing a trembling finger at Mia. This murderer has no right to be here. She killed our father." The accusation, which had once sealed Mia's fate, now fell flat, landing in the courtyard with a dull, unconvincing thud. The assembled alphas looked from the hysterical, accusing Ilara to the calm, regal Mia, and doubt was sown in every mind. Mia didn't even look at Ilara. She kept her eyes locked on Baxter, delivering the final, calculated blow. "The past is a country I have no desire to revisit," she said, her voice carrying a weight that silenced the crowd. "I am here to discuss the future. Our packs are neighbors, Alpha Baxter. It would be unwise to let the ghosts of yesterday dictate the politics of tomorrow." She gave a slight polite nod, then turned, her betas falling in beside her, and walked past him, into his mansion, as if she owned it. Baxter stood rooted to the spot, watching her go. The scent of wild strawberries and cold iron filled his senses, a torturous, beautiful perfume. The mate bond screamed in his chest, a constant, agonizing reminder of what he had lost, of what was now so magnificently, devastatingly out of his reach. He had wanted to be free of her. He had gotten his wish, and it felt like a punishment worse than 100 lashes. For the first time, staring at the proud, unyielding back of the woman he had discarded, Alpha Baxter felt the first cold, crushing fingers of true soul-crushing regret. And in the shadows of a second-floor window, a pair of pale winter sky eyes watched the entire scene. A slow, satisfied smile spreading across Alpha Duncan's face. The game had begun, and his queen had just made her first, perfect move. Chapter 6. A Feast of Poison and Pride. The great hall of the Midnight Fang Mansion was a spectacle of forced merriment. Torches flickered, casting dancing shadows on banners depicting the pack's history of strength. The air was thick with the scent of roasted meat, spiced wine, and the underlying tension of a dozen rival alphas gathered under one roof. It was the welcome feast, a tradition meant to foster camaraderie before the hard business of the summit began. Mia entered on the arm of Alpha Duncan. A fresh wave of stunned silence rolled through the hall as they appeared in the doorway. Duncan was every inch the feared warlord, his silver-tipped dark hair and pale, piercing eyes commanding immediate respect and caution. But it was the woman beside him who stole the breath from every throat. She wore a gown of deep midnight blue, simple in cut but exquisite in fabric, that seemed to drink the torchlight. It hugged the new, powerful lines of her body before flowing to the floor. Her scars were hidden, but the strength they represented was not. She carried herself with an innate authority that made the expensive gown seem like armor. This was not the broken girl they had heard whispers about. This was a queen. Baxter, seated at the head of the high table, felt the world tilt. Seeing her in the courtyard had been a shock. Seeing her now, radiant and poised on the arm of the most ruthless alpha on the continent, was a hellish torment. The mate bond, a festering wound since her return, throbbed with a vicious, possessive agony. Every instinct screamed at him to rip her away from Duncan, to challenge him to mark her and claim her before them all. Ilara, seated beside him, looked as if she had swallowed poison. Her smile was a rictus of hatred. Duncan led Mia to their assigned seats, not at the high table with Baxter, but at a prominent table with the other visiting alphas. It was a deliberate placement, a statement of her status as an equal leader, not a subordinate. As Duncan pulled out her chair, his hand rested on the small of her back for a moment, a gesture of intimate possession that was not lost on anyone, least of all Baxter, whose knuckles turned white around his goblet. The feast began, but the food tasted like bitter pills in Baxter's mouth. He couldn't tear his eyes away from her. He watched her converse easily with the alpha to her left, a grizzled old warrior from the northern packs. He saw her laugh, a low melodic sound that he had never heard before, and it struck him with the force of a physical blow. She had never laughed like that in his presence. She had only ever flinched and cried. He was so consumed by his own torment that he didn't notice the slow, calculated shift in the room's dynamics. The other alphas, initially wary of the Blood Moon contingent, were being disarmed by Mia. She spoke knowledgeably about border patrol patterns, about trade routes, about the migratory habits of prey that affected all their territories. She was sharp, insightful, and her words carried the weight of Duncan's backing. They were starting to listen to her. They were starting to see her not as Baxter's cast-off, but as Duncan's Luna. The breaking point came during a lull in the conversations. Ilara, her voice sweetly venomous, called out from the high table. "Luna Mia," she began, ensuring every ear was turned. "We are all simply dying to know. However did you manage to survive? The last we saw you were, well, let's just say the condition you were in was not conducive to a long life." A hush fell over the hall. It was a brutal, public stripping, an attempt to remind everyone of the broken creature she had been. Mia took a slow sip of her wine, placing the goblet down with a calm finality. She turned her head, her gaze meeting Ilara's across the room. There was no anger in her eyes, only a cool, pitying contempt. Survival, Ilara, is often a matter of finding oneself in the right place, at the right time, and with the right people, she said, her voice carrying easily. I was fortunate. The moon goddess, it seems, had other plans for me after my unjust expulsion. She let the word unjust hang in the air, a direct challenge to the official narrative. Baxter flinched. And what plans were those? Ilara pressed, her smile tightening. To become a charity case for the Blood Moon Pack? A low growl rumbled in Duncan's chest, but Mia placed a gentle hand on his arm, silencing him. This was her fight. Charity? Mia repeated, a faint, knowing smile touching her lips. No. Alpha Duncan does not deal in charity. He deals in value. He saw potential where others saw only a victim. He saw strength where others saw weakness. Her eyes shifted from Alara and landed squarely, devastatingly on Baxter. He saw a Luna, where others willfully blinded themselves. The accusation was direct, elegant, and utterly damning. She hadn't called him a fool. She had called him blind, a leader who could not see the treasure right in front of him. Baxter felt the judgmental eyes of every alpha in the room upon him. He saw the dawning realization on their faces. They were looking at the magnificent woman Mia had become, and imagining the pathetic creature Baxter had described, the one he had whipped and exiled. The discrepancy was too vast. The lie was becoming evident. He couldn't take it anymore. The mate pull, the public humiliation, the searing regret. It was all too much. He stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the stone floor. A word, he ground out, his voice strained, his gaze locked on Mia. In private. Duncan's pale eyes glinted with cold fire. My Luna is not required to grant you a private audience, Baxter. You forfeited that right when you ordered her execution. The word execution sent a fresh murmur through the crowd. This is between me and my mate, Baxter roared, his control shattering. The hall went utterly, deathly silent. Mia slowly rose to her feet. The movement was fluid and powerful. She looked at Baxter, and for the first time, she allowed the full frozen force of her hatred to show in her eyes. I am not your mate, Alpha Baxter, she said, her voice like shards of ice. The bond you speak of was murdered on that whipping post, alongside my loyalty to this pack. It was left to die at the border, abandoned and bleeding out. I belong to the Blood Moon pack now. I belong to Alpha Duncan. She didn't wait for his response. She turned to Duncan. The journey has tired me, my love. I believe I will retire. Duncan stood, his gaze sweeping over the stunned assembly before settling on Baxter with a look of triumphant contempt. He offered Mia his arm. Of course, my heart. As they walked from the hall, Baxter could only stand there exposed and crumbling before his peers. He had wanted to contest for her, to claim her, and she had not only refused him, she had publicly executed the very idea, burying it with a finality that left no room for hope. He had lost. Not just the woman, but his honor, his standing, and any shred of respect the other alphas had for him. The feast was over. For Baxter, the true famine had just begun. Chapter 7. The Cracks in the Mask. The summit began the next morning, but the carefully choreographed agenda of border disputes and trade agreements had been irrevocably shredded. The air in the council chamber was thick, not with political maneuvering, but with the lingering shock of the previous night's confrontation. All eyes kept drifting to the two figures representing the Blood Moon pack. Alpha Duncan sat with a relaxed, almost predatory stillness, his pale eyes missing nothing. But it was Mia who commanded the room. She had changed from the elegant gown into tailored warrior's leathers, a silent declaration that she was not here as a decorative consort, but as a participant. She listened to the other alphas debate a contentious strip of hunting land along the northern ridge, her expression one of focused intensity. Baxter, presiding over the meeting from his ornate chair, was a ghost of his former self. Dark circles bruised the skin under his eyes, and a faint tremor ran through the hand that held his notes. He tried to project authority, but his voice lacked its usual conviction. He was a man haunted, his gaze constantly pulled to the one person in the room who refused to look at him. The Northern Alpha, a bear of a man named Goran, slammed a fist on the table. The Silvermane pack has hunted that ridge for 5 generations. Your recent patrols, Baxter, are an act of aggression. The prey patterns have shifted, Baxter retorted, though his words sounded rote, rehearsed. My patrols are within our rights to secure our food supply. Your rights are choking ours, Goran boomed. It was then that Mia spoke, her voice calm and clear, cutting through the rising tempers. The prey hasn't shifted, Alpha Goran, it's been displaced. All heads turned to her. Goran scowled. And what would you know of it, girl? A faint, cold smile touched her lips. The Blood Moon Pack borders the northern reaches. We've observed a pack of rogue wolves driven from the eastern wastes that have settled in the foothills beneath your ridge. They are harassing the herds, forcing them into the valley where the Midnight Fang patrols are thickest. You are not fighting each other for the prey. You are both suffering from a common third problem. A stunned silence filled the chamber. It was a simple, elegant piece of logic that had eluded both proud alphas, too focused on their rivalry to see the larger picture. Duncan finally spoke, his gravelly voice a low rumble of support. My Luna has a keen eye for the battlefield, even one without obvious armies. She has spent the last year learning to see what others miss. The implication was a stinging lash against Baxter's pride. She learned this elsewhere. Because you never thought to teach her. You never saw her capable of it. Goran stared at Mia, his belligerence fading into grudging respect. Is this true? Send a scout to the foothills, Mia said, meeting his gaze squarely. Look for the signs. You'll find them. The dynamic of the room shifted palpably. The other alphas began looking to her for insight, asking her opinion on water rights, on timber disputes. She answered not with emotional appeals, but with sharp observation and strategic logic, her words often backed by a quiet, confirming nod from Duncan. She was no longer just a startling survivor. She was a formidable political mind. Baxter could only watch, a spectator at his own summit. Each intelligent comment from her was a fresh indictment of his failure. He had owned a priceless diamond and had treated it as worthless glass, and now the whole world was gathering to admire its brilliance in another man's crown. During a short recess, he finally managed to corner her. He stepped into her path as she moved towards a refreshment table, away from the main group. Mia, he said, his voice low and strained. We need to talk. She didn't startle. She simply stopped, turning those cool, composed eyes on him. We have nothing to discuss, Alpha Baxter. Don't, he pleaded, the word foreign on his tongue. He was begging. Don't call me that. The bond, Mia, I can feel it. It's not dead. It's agony. For a fleeting second, he saw something flicker in her eyes, not softening, but a deep, old well of pain. The agony you feel is not the bond, Baxter. It's your conscience. A little late for it to awaken, don't you think? I was wrong, he breathed, taking a half-step closer, desperate. The scent of her, wild strawberries and cold iron, was a sweet torture. I see that now. By the moon goddess, I see it. Look at you. You are magnificent. You were always meant to be a Luna. My Luna. Her expression hardened into something impenetrable. I was your Luna. You made me clean your sister's toilets. You let her treat me like a slave. You watched them whip me until my back was shredded, and then you left me for dead. Her voice remained low, but every word was a shard of ice. You don't get to look at me now and claim what you so willingly destroyed. It was Alara, he hissed, guilt and frustration twisting his features. She misled me. She lied. Mia's laugh was a soft, bitter sound. She lied, and you were all too eager to believe her. You wanted to believe her. Because the truth that the moon goddess had given you a mate you deemed unworthy was inconvenient for your pride. She looked him up and down, a final dismissive assessment. You were not misled, Baxter. You were complicit. She moved to step around him, but he grabbed her wrist. The contact was electric, a jolt of the raw mate connection that made them both stiffen. For him, it was a surge of desperate, possessive hope. For her, it was the trigger for a flood of traumatic memory. Let go of me, she whispered, her voice dangerously quiet. Come back to me, he begged, his grip tightening. I'll make it right. I'll punish Alara. I'll mark you before the entire pack. We can fix this. It was in that moment, with his hand on her wrist and his plea in the air, that the door to the council chamber opened and Alara walked in. She froze, her eyes widening as she took in the scene. Her brother, desperate, clutching the wrist of the woman he had exiled, who was staring at him with an expression of pure, unadulterated loathing. The mask of the spoilt princess finally, completely, shattered. "You," Alara snarled, her voice trembling with a venomous rage. "You're trying to take him from me, even now?" Mia finally wrenched her wrist from Baxter's grasp. She didn't even look at Alara. Her gaze remained locked on Baxter, delivering her final verdict. "You see," she said softly, "you can't even control your own sister. You are an alpha who cannot command his own household. How can you possibly lead a pack?" She turned and walked away, leaving Baxter standing alone, exposed and defeated, with the furious, unraveling presence of his sister bearing down on him. The cracks in his facade were no longer hidden. They were a chasm, and he was falling. Chapter 8. The Serpent's Confession. The summit dissolved into a tense, unproductive stalemate. The other alphas, having witnessed Baxter's unraveling and Mia's startling competence, were losing faith in his leadership. Whispers filled the corridors of the mansion, no longer about the exiled Luna's return, but about the alpha who had lost his mate, his honor, and now, his grip on authority. Baxter retreated to his study, a bottle of whiskey his only companion. The phantom pain of the mate bond was a constant gnawing torment, but it was the memory of Mia's eyes, so full of cold, final hatred, that truly flayed him alive. "You were complicit." The words echoed in the silence, a verdict he could not escape. He drank, trying to drown the image of her broken body at the whipping post, the sound of Alara's triumphant sobs, the sight of his father's lifeless eyes. The memories, once buried under a mountain of pride and willful ignorance, now rose up to accuse him with terrifying clarity. Meanwhile, Alara paced her room like a caged animal. The fear that had been a cold stone in her gut since Mia's return was now a raging inferno. She had seen the look in her brother's eyes, the desperate, possessive hunger. He was slipping away from her. The brother who had always been her unwavering protector, her accomplice, was being stolen by the very ghost they had created. Her panic sought a target. It found one in Kieran, the head beta who was overseeing the night patrols in the main hall. "Where is my brother?" she demanded, her voice shrill. Kieran turned, his expression carefully neutral. "In his study, Lady Alara." "He's with her, isn't he?" she accused, her fingers curling into claws. "No, he is alone." "Liar," she shrieked, the sound echoing in the vast space. "You all look at her now like she's some kind of queen. You've forgotten what she did. She murdered my father." Kieran did not flinch. He had served the pack for decades under Bourne's wise rule and now under Baxter's crumbling one. He had held Mia as she was lashed, had seen the truth in her eyes when she swore her innocence, and had watched for a year as a shadow of doubt grew over Alara's story. "Did she, my lady?" Kieran asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "The story has always seemed incomplete." Alara's face went deathly pale. The calm, questioning tone from the usually stoic beta was more terrifying than any direct accusation. It was the sound of the ground giving way beneath her feet. "You doubt me?" she whispered, her voice trembling with a mixture of fury and terror. "I serve the Alpha," Kieran said, his gaze unwavering. "And the truth. The two have not felt aligned for some time." That was the final push. The carefully constructed dam of her lies cracked. All the fear, the jealousy, the frantic need to maintain her power boiled over into a hysterical confession. "The truth!" she screamed, her composure shattering into a million pieces. "You want the truth? The truth is that she was a nobody who was going to take my place. My brother was going to be stuck with that clumsy oaf for life, and my father, he was going to make Baxter recognize her. He was going to force him to be a true mate to that thing." Kieran stood perfectly still, his entire body tensed. What happened on the stairs, Alara? Tears of rage streamed down her face. I heard them arguing. Father was defending her, telling Baxter he was a fool. I went up there and I saw him. I saw the disappointment in his eyes. For me. For how I treated her. He said I was a disgrace to the family name. Me. He was choosing her over his own blood. Her breath hitched in ragged sobs. He turned to walk away from me. I reached out to stop him, to make him see. I just pushed him. I didn't mean for him to fall. It was an accident. The confession hung in the air, stark and ugly. The great hall was silent, but unbeknownst to Alara, her raised, hysterical voice had carried. A servant, frozen in the shadow of the staircase, had heard every word. An alpha from the Howling Crag pack, stepping out of a nearby guest room to investigate the noise, had heard. The truth, once whispered, was now free, and it began to spread through the mansion like wildfire. Kieran stared at her, his face a mask of grim sorrow and dawning fury. You killed your father, and you condemned an innocent woman to death for it. It was her fault, Alara wept, collapsing to her knees. If she had never come here, none of this would have happened. She ruined everything. At that moment, the study door slammed open. Baxter stood there, his face ashen, the bottle of whiskey forgotten in his hand. He had heard it. He had heard every damning word. The alcohol in his system did nothing to numb the cataclysmic shock that ripped through him. The world he had built, the justice he had prided himself on, the reasons he had clung to, all of it was a lie, constructed by the sister he had protected above all else. His eyes, bloodshot and wide with horror, locked onto Alara's kneeling form. Alara, he whispered, the name a strangled question. She looked up at him, her face a mess of tears and smeared makeup, her eyes pleading. Baxter, brother, I didn't mean to. It was an accident. You have to believe me. But the spell was broken. He saw her now not as his spoilt, beloved sister, but as a cunning, manipulative murderer. He saw the years of her torment, not as harmless pranks, but as the cruel foundation that had led to this moment. He saw his own reflection in her tears, a gullible fool, a blind alpha, a male who had betrayed his true mate for a lie. The mate bond in his chest, which had been a source of agony, suddenly flared into a different kind of pain, a pure, cleansing fire of rage, and a grief so profound it felt like his soul was being torn in two. He had executed his mate. He had ordered the whipping and exile of the one the moon goddess had made for him, for a lie. A low, guttural growl started deep in his chest, building into a roar of pure, unadulterated anguish that shook the very foundations of the mansion. What have you done? Chapter 9. The weight of the crown. Baxter's roar was the sound of a world ending. It was not just a cry of anger, but the shattering of every foundation his life had been built upon. His trust in his sister, his perception of his own judgment, the very narrative that had allowed him to live with himself for the past year. The sound echoed through the great hall, a seismic event that drew every remaining alpha, beta, and servant from the shadows. They gathered in a silent, horrified semicircle, witnessing the unmaking of their alpha. Alara cowered on the floor, the truth having stripped her of all her cunning and poise, leaving only a raw, terrified core. It was an accident, she whimpered, the plea sounding hollow and pathetic in the wake of her own damning confession. Baxter took a staggering step toward her, his face a contorted mask of grief and fury. An accident? He repeated, his voice a broken, ragged thing. You pushed our father down a flight of stairs and you called it an accident? You watched as I... He couldn't say it. The image of Mia at the whipping post, her back laid open, her eyes dead, flashed behind his eyes with horrifying clarity. You let me condemn an innocent woman to death. His gaze swept over the assembled crowd, seeing the dawning realization and judgment in their eyes. They had all been complicit. They had all watched, some with pity, most with grim satisfaction, as their Luna was brutalized and exiled for a crime she did not commit. The weight of collective guilt settled over the hall, thick and suffocating. Kieran stepped forward, his voice heavy with duty and a long-suppressed pain. "Alpha," he said, the title now feeling like an accusation. "The pack law is clear. The punishment for the murder of a member of the Alpha's family is 100 strokes and hanging at the border." The same words he had spoken to Baxter in this very mansion a year ago, regarding Mia. The symmetry was cruel and absolute. Baxter flinched as if struck. He looked from Kieran's stern face to his sister's weeping form. His sister. His flesh and blood. The one he had doted on, protected, and believed without question. To condemn her was to condemn the last remaining piece of his family, to fully accept that the world he had known was a poisonous fiction. But the alternative, showing her the mercy he had denied Mia, was unthinkable. It would be the final, irrevocable proof that he was the weak, hypocritical leader Mia had named him. His shoulders, usually so straight and proud, slumped under the colossal weight. The crown of the Alpha was no longer a symbol of power, but a band of searing iron. "Take her," he whispered, the words tearing from his throat. "To the cells." As two betas moved to obey, their hands firm on Alara's arms, she found a last reservoir of spite. She twisted in their grip, her eyes blazing with a final, desperate hatred as she was dragged away. "You're a fool, Baxter. You always were. You were never the Alpha Father wanted you to be. He knew it. He died knowing his son was a weak, pathetic." The cell door clanged shut, cutting off her screams. The silence that followed was deeper than before. The other Alphas exchanged grim looks. There would be no more summit. The internal collapse of the Midnight Fang Pack was a far more pressing and dangerous matter than any border dispute. Baxter stood alone in the center of the hall, the eyes of his pack upon him. He was their leader, but he had led them into a great moral darkness. He had to make this right. There was only one path, and it filled him with a terror greater than any battle. He had to go to Mia. He found her in the guest wing, standing on a balcony overlooking the moonlit gardens. Duncan was a silent, watchful presence in the doorway behind her, a sentinel of her new life. She didn't turn as Baxter approached, her posture as unyielding as the stone of the railing. "Mia." Her name was a prayer on his lips, a plea for an absence he knew he did not deserve. She didn't respond. She simply waited. He stopped a few feet behind her, the distance between them an uncrossable chasm. The words he had rehearsed crumbled to dust in his mouth. There was no excuse, no justification. There was only the stark, ugly truth. "Alara confessed," he said, the words hollow. "She pushed my father. It was an accident. But she lied. She let me believe it was you." Mia remained silent, a statue carved from moonlight and ice. The silence was worse than any accusation. It forced him to continue, to lay his soul bare before the woman he had broken. "I was wrong," he choked out, the admission scraping his throat raw. "I was blind and arrogant and a fool. I failed you. I failed my father. I failed my pack." He took a shuddering breath, the final, most painful confession yet to come. The bond, it was never dead for me. It was a constant torment, a reminder of my failure. But now knowing what I did to you, the pain is 1,000 times worse. I would take every lash on my own back if I could. I would trade my life for yours to have been different. Finally, she turned. The moonlight illuminated her face, and there was no hatred there now. There was something worse. A vast, impenetrable peace. A finality. "Your pain does not absolve you, Baxter," she said, her voice quiet and impossibly calm. "My scars are not erased by your regret. You speak of the bond as your torment, but you forget. You were mine. You were the living embodiment of every lash, every insult, every moment of despair. You are not my salvation. You are the ghost of my past." He felt the last flicker of hope die in his chest. She was not just refusing him, she was exiling him from her heart, her history, her very being. "I have condemned Alara," he said, a last desperate offering. "She will face the punishment you were meant to. The law will be served." A faint, sorrowful smile touched Mia's lips. "The law? Your law is a blunt, brutal instrument, Baxter. It does not bring back the dead. It does not heal the broken. It only creates more scars." She looked past him to where Duncan stood. "I have found a different kind of justice. A future." She turned back to the balcony, dismissing him as completely as if he had ceased to exist. Baxter stood there for a long moment, the truth of her words settling into his bones. He had come to her seeking. What? Forgiveness? A chance? There was none to be had. His punishment was not a whipping post or a noose. It was this: to live with the knowledge of what he had lost, to see the magnificent Luna she had become, and to know that he had been the architect of his own eternal desolation. He was the alpha of the Midnight Fang, but he ruled over a kingdom of ashes. As he walked away, his steps heavy with a grief that would never leave him, Duncan finally moved from the doorway. He came to stand beside Mia, his presence a solid, unwavering comfort. "He is broken," Duncan observed, his voice low. Mia watched the shadow of her former mate disappear into the darkness of the mansion. "Some things," she whispered, "cannot be fixed. They can only be left behind." She had carried the weight of his crown of thorns for long enough. Now it was his to bear alone. Chapter 10. A New Moon Rising. Dawn broke over the Midnight Fang territory not with hope, but with the grim finality of justice. The pack gathered once more at the training grounds, the air cold and still. The post, still stained with Mia's blood from a year past, now held a different figure. Alara, her fine clothes replaced by a rough shift, was tied to it, her face a bloated, tear-streaked mask of terror. The defiance was gone, burned away by the certain knowledge of her fate. Alpha Baxter stood on the platform, but he was a hollowed-out shell of the leader who had presided over Mia's punishment. His face was gray, his eyes vacant. He did not look at his sister. He stared at a point somewhere in the distance, his soul already in exile. He gave the order with a voice stripped of all emotion, a dead man reciting a script. The whip cracked. Alara's screams were sharp, pathetic things, devoid of the theatrical quality of her previous grief. They were the raw, genuine sounds of pain and terror. The pack watched in stony silence. There was no satisfaction in this, only a necessary, ugly surgery to cut out a festering wound. With each lash, Baxter flinched, each crack of the leather a ghostly echo on his own scarred soul. Mia and Duncan watched from the balcony of her guest room, distant observers. Mia felt nothing. No vindication, no pleasure. The spectacle was merely the closing of a bloody, brutal chapter. When it was over, and Alara's limp, broken form was cut down, Mia turned away. It was done. An hour later, as the sun climbed higher, the Blood Moon delegation assembled in the courtyard preparing to depart. Their mission was complete, though not in the way any summit had intended. They had exposed a rotten core and witnessed a kingdom begin to crumble. Baxter emerged from the mansion. He walked toward them, his movements slow, as if he carried the weight of the entire world. He stopped a few feet from Mia, his eyes full of a bottomless despair, finally meeting hers. "The sentence has been carried out," he said, his voice a hollow rasp. Mia simply nodded. There was nothing more to say. His gaze then shifted to Duncan, and a flicker of the old alpha surfaced, a final, futile spark of challenge. "You won," Baxter stated, the words tasting like ash. Duncan's arm rested possessively around Mia's waist. "This was never a game to be won, Baxter," he replied, his tone cool and dismissive. "It was a lesson, one you failed to learn until it was too late." He looked down at Mia, his expression softening into something genuine and fierce. I am merely the male who recognized a treasure when it was discarded in the dirt. The finality in Duncan's words, the sheer unassailable rightness of his claim, broke the last of Baxter's spirit. The challenge died in his eyes. He was not a victor or a vanquished. He was irrelevant. He watched, a statue of regret, as Duncan helped Mia onto her horse with a tender, intimate care that Baxter had never once offered her. He watched as she settled into the saddle, her posture straight and proud, a Luna in every sense of the word. She did not look back. As the Blood Moon party rode out of the courtyard, the Midnight Fang pack members who had gathered to see them off did not look to their own alpha for guidance. Their eyes were fixed on Mia's retreating back, a silent, collective acknowledgement of what had been lost and what they had allowed to be destroyed. Baxter stood there long after they had disappeared from view, the silence of the courtyard pressing in on him. The mansion, once a symbol of his power, now felt like a gilded tomb. His sister was condemned, his father was dead by her hand, his mate was forever lost to his most feared rival, and his pack's faith in him was shattered. He was the alpha, but he ruled over nothing. Weeks later, in the strong, vibrant heart of the Blood Moon territory, a different ceremony took place. Under a sky scattered with 1,000,000 stars, before the entire pack and the benevolent gaze of the moon, Alpha Duncan took Mia's hands in his. There were no doubts, no resentful whispers, no hidden cruelty. There was only the profound, peaceful certainty of the mate bond, now fully acknowledged and celebrated. I, Duncan, Alpha of the Blood Moon Pack, take you, Mia, as my mate, my Luna, and my heart. I offer you my strength, my loyalty, and my life. Your past is my past. Your future is my future. I claim you before the Moon Goddess and our pack, now and forever. Tears, not of pain, but of a joy so profound it healed ancient wounds, streamed down Mia's face. The scars on her back, hidden by a beautiful gown of silver and black, did not ache. They were simply a part of her history, a testament to the strength that had brought her here. And I, Mia, accept you, Duncan, as my mate, my alpha, and my soul. I offer you my heart, my wisdom, and my unwavering faith. I stand by your side, not as a victim, but as your equal. I accept your claim, before the Moon Goddess and our pack, now and forever. As their lips met in a searing, promise-filled kiss, a collective cheer erupted from the Blood Moon Pack, a sound of pure, untainted joy. The bond between them snapped into its final, unbreakable form, a brilliant golden light that outshone the stars. Later, wrapped in each other's arms in the quiet of their chamber, Mia laid her head on Duncan's chest, listening to the steady, strong beat of his heart. It's over, she whispered. Duncan kissed her hair, his arms tightening around her. No, my love, he murmured, his voice full of a fierce, protective love. It is just beginning. Far away, in a dark and silent study, Alpha Baxter stared into a dying fire, the cheers of a distant celebration nothing but a ghost in the wind, and the weight of his crown finally crushed him. As the echoes of the Blood Moon celebration fade and the embers of Baxter's reign cool to ash, a single haunting question remains for us, the listeners, to ponder. If Mia had never been falsely accused and exiled, would she have ever risen to become the formidable Luna she was always destined to be? Or would she have remained forever trapped and unseen in the shadow of Baxter's pride? Some might argue that her strength was always there, waiting for the right circumstances and the right alpha to help it ignite. Others might believe that the very cruelty of her past was the necessary fire that forged her into a queen. What do you think? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this tale of betrayal, vengeance, and triumphant transformation has captivated you, stay tuned for the next thrilling installment in the Werewolf Shifter Romance series.